first episode today explores a book called Missional Map-Making by Alex Roxburgh. Imagine the idea that the communal stories which bind us all together could be told and represented on a map. Features such as stories from the community, civic buildings, annual events, all of these could be demonstrated through the topography, landscape and symbols that you find on any common daily map. We know this cultural map well, and it's embedded in the back of our minds. It helps us to navigate our way around society, around cultural norms, and what to do when things get challenging. The map that we're familiar with paints a picture of a predictable world. Certain words such as clarity, control, and certainty are the watchwords of this world. Everything from governments through to banks and churches are run on these lines. This is the familiar landscape that our churches sit snugly within. But when the cultural landscape starts to shift under our feet, the world becomes a less recognisable place. We still use these old maps in our minds to navigate our way through life. But we know that the world is changing, and our maps are no longer making sense of the world around us. In his book, Roxburgh reminds us that the tools that we use to shape the world also shape and define us. For example, in 1687, Isaac Newton envisaged a predictable clockwork universe that could be analysed and predicted through mathematical observation. This set the tone for the modern era, and that era of predictability, certainty and control is now starting to end. But what is the new world like? We cannot be certain yet because it's still taking shape. The map, as it were, is not yet drawn. But our world is certainly being reshaped by the undercurrents of globalisation, rapid technological change, and the loss of confidence in those primary structures and institutions that shaped the old world. But in another way, this new world actually looks very much like an older world. The internet, which shapes this emerging world, also shapes us. And it reminds us of an ancient bazaar, a melting pot of ideas, interactions, and manipulations and hope. What will this new world look like? At the moment, we cannot say because the new maps are still being drawn. However, the old ways of planning, managing, and predicting are becoming increasingly irrelevant. So, what about the church? Roxburgh says that when a church gets a sense that the landscape it sits on is changing, it should sit up and take notice. However, he cautions us that churches can make the mistake of prioritising looking after their own ecclesial ecosystem, as it were, rather than sitting up and taking notice of the changing culture around them. When this does happen, a gap can grow between the church and the community it serves. So Roxburgh's saying that the maps that we have in our minds, those cultural maps that we use to navigate life and to guide us in our business and social interactions, these are now increasingly out of date. And so what does that do for the church? The church plans and does things in this way in many ways. If those tools are no longer the tools of the new era, what are we to do? Roxburgh wants to encourage us, and he says that the church has been here before. The church helped shape the changing culture of the Roman and medieval worlds before. There are 4 steps to starting to read new maps, and Roxburgh wants to take us through these. These 4 steps are assessing the land, redefining a core Christian identity, creating a parallel culture, and partnering with allies. Let's look at those a bit more deeply. Step 1, assessing the land. The old landscape, with its certain rigidity and familiarity, is disappearing. The emerging landscape is much more fluid and fragmented, affecting the way we think, the nature of marriage, our social relationships with each other, and business, and many other things besides. Our congregations are in touch with these communities as they change. Roxburgh is suggesting instead of planning and strategizing in the old ways, we need to stop and just start to have conversations with our congregations. The congregations have an intuitive understanding of where the communities are at. And for us, especially for those who are in church leadership, we need to learn to value these conversations much more and listen to the voice of God speaking from within them. Step 2, developing a core Christian identity. Many people these days do not have coherent belief systems, but according to Roxburgh, they're living off fragments of religious belief. Sometimes this way of living is even within our own communities and the churches. Roxburgh suggests that instead of living off fragments, we should go back and try and understand the whole story. Stories are often embedded in practices and habits that Christians enact throughout the years. These are the habits and practices of faith formation, which the church has a rich heritage of. However, today, these habits and practices, according to Roxburgh, are largely forgotten. We can cultivate a core Christian identity through the recovery of such habits and practices, which carry both the story of Jesus and our own story of faith, of our journey in faith. Roxburgh seems to be light on detail about what these habits and practices are. However, the United Reformed Church has a bit of a head start because it has been exploring this in depth already with the adopting of the ideas of Richard Roberts' book, Holy Habits. And we might explore these in a future video. Step 3, developing a parallel culture. Roxburgh uses the story of the fall of the communist government in Czechoslovakia in the 20th century, when the citizens who were locked out of the ruling elites started to plan and dream of an alternative parallel society. These stories started off in small gatherings, in cafes and places like that. People shared stories of how the world could be. These stories were started by a playwright, and the stories developed momentum, leading eventually to the overthrow of the Czechoslovakian communist government. Roxburgh says that likewise, we could invest in small groups of intentional pilgrims who explore and experiment with carrying the story of Jesus through their own lives, their own habits, and their own practices. It's not something that should be a grand strategy for the whole church, but should be something done within small groups. Step 4, partnering with allies. The skill set of a Christian leader is changing. The strategist and the planner has gone. Instead, a Christian leader is a different beast altogether. This person will be a cultivator of missional environments, which through conversation, permission giving, and experimentation can find new ways to engage in ministry. But also, what they do is they find allies in their ministries. These allies don't have to be Christian, they could be of a non Christian background or of another faith, but where there's common and key areas, you work together. But the trick is to maintain your own Christian integrity and core identity. To conclude, Roxburgh finishes with a positive note. He reminds us of our history. We've been here before. The church has witnessed one culture die and another take shape. He encourages us to prayerfully and with small steps to start exploring this new landscape as it emerges. We don't have to make giant and uninformed jumps into the unknown, but we start with the congregations. They are rooted in the communities and have an intuitive sense of what is going on. We start by talking with our beloved sisters and brothers, mothers and fathers of the faith, and finding how their lives are changing in this new culture. And from those conversations, we start to make small steps of practices, of habits, creating a parallel culture, of holding a core identity that's faithful to the Christian story. And through strong devotional life, we follow the Holy Spirit into this new land. What do you think? Do you think these ideas have any relevance to our churches today? Do they help us to shape where we might want to go? Please spread the word of this video. Share some of the ideas with some of your friends. Maybe if you're in an eldership team, discuss some of the ideas yourselves. Maybe the ideas are not relevant for you at this time. But thank you very much. This is Daniel Harris, planning and dreaming and praying for a new world that the church serves in.